When my parents were in a car accident, I was lying on the surgical table for a miscarriage. At my parents' funeral, I kept calling Felix Jean again and again, until his childhood friend Stella Ning answered, her tone impatient. Felix is going to wash the strawberries for me, what do you need? Holding the urn, I said with indifference. Nothing, just let Felix know after you eat the strawberries. I agreed to the divorce. I was taking my parents' remains to the crematorium alone, along with the second child of my husband Felix Jean, whom I personally killed. All my relatives in this world were locked together into that small incinerator, becoming a handful of ashes. But never mind. I'm almost dead too. My parents were kind-hearted people in life, and many relatives and friends came to their funeral. The only one who didn't show up, the one who should have been there the most, was my husband Felix Jean. My parents' closest uncle, when mentioning Felix Jean's name, shook his head in anger, gazed at me full of heartache. They all said very similar things. Old Liang and his wife, kind all their lives, ended up supporting Felix Jean, such a vengeful, ungrateful person. I wore black mourning clothes, holding the ashes, walking on the funeral road. The sky is overcast. My lower abdomen still aches faintly and I slowly touch it. That place once carried 2 unborn children within it. Unfortunately. All right, since their father doesn't love me, he naturally won't love them either. The half of the wrist exposed from the mourning sleeve, dry, yellow, and emaciated. I remember the doctor said I have 3 more months to live. In these 3 months, I will take my parents and the baby's ashes to see the world one last time. Not taking Felix with me. I took out my phone and dialed the number that was memorized to the bone. Over and over, no answer. Until the 13th time it finally connected. Speaking was Stella Ning, Felix Jin's childhood friend, who asked with a coquettish tone. Big sister, it's 4 a.m. in Los Angeles right now. In the past I would have definitely screamed at her, calling her a bitch. I have something to do with Felix Jean. Stella Ning snorted coldly, extremely impatient. Felix is going to wash the strawberries for me, what do you need? Before I could answer she scoffed again. Are you watching too closely? We just finished a major meeting, Felix and I are both tired. If you have something to say, just tell me directly. I was silent for a moment, my gaze turning to the urn in my arms, and replied to her with an indifferent expression. Nothing, just let Felix know after you eat the strawberries. I agree to the divorce. After speaking, I didn't wait for her reaction and hung up the phone. I have loved Felix Jean for 10 years and bound him with marriage for 5. But I still couldn't warm his heart. Now I choose to let go. 2. The next day I received another call from Felix Jean. I'm sorting through my parents' belongings. Felix Jean on the phone with an unpleasant tone. Ione Liang, what are you stirring up again? I've told you many times, taking Stella abroad this time is just for discussing cooperation. You deliberately made Stella cry last night, saying she wanted to divorce me. Stella was heartbroken all night. Do you find that amusing? Stella Ning is indeed Felix's treasure on his heart. He chooses to believe in such a clumsy lie. If it were his former self he might also have grievances and argued. But now let him believe as he wishes. I carefully wiped the photo of my parents, replying softly, okay, so when are you coming back? Let's go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get divorced. But the other end stopped talking. A moment of silence. I thought he was considering the division of property and comforted him. Don't worry, I don't want a penny of yours, leaving with nothing but my clothes. Anyway, I won't live much longer. Felix Jin's money, I definitely don't want, it's too dirty. Felix Jean, however, gritted his teeth and said viciously, Ionirong, I can never divorce you. Give up on this idea. After saying that he hung up the phone directly. I was speechless. Before going abroad, it was him who said those harsh words. Ionirong, it was your family that forced Stella out, and you're the one who ruined her happiness for life. If you keep acting this way, then get divorced. The reason he dropped such harsh words is because Stella rather broke my first child's ashes jar. I slapped her. Felix Jean, who had come in response to the commotion, showed disgust upon seeing the ashes on the ground. Stella Ning explained with a sobbing voice, Felix, I didn't mean to, I'm sorry, I was just scared. Felix heard this and slapped me hard for Stella. With a hateful tone, you're already dead, why keep your ashes at home? It's bad luck. It was also then that I finally gave up on my heart. He really doesn't love me, even to the extent of hating the child I carried for him. He detests me to the extreme. So on the 3rd day of his trip abroad, I had the second child aborted. 3. It was a warm and sunny day. My parents had just attended their cousin's wedding. They didn't know yet that I was pregnant, but they were very happy. Because they had just received an investment. With this money, the originally bankrupt factory could reopen. Just as I was about to call them, I suddenly received an audio message from an unknown number. There was only the voice of Felix Jean in the recording. He said, Stella Ning's brother's leukemia is a time bomb. Fortunately, Ione Liang is still useful. Later I will have another child with her. The umbilical cord blood of the child can save lives. I was struck dumb. I have always known that Felix Jean doesn't love me. But I never expected him to scheme against me to this extent. So I gave up. At that moment my last shred of love for Felix Jean faded. I went directly to the hospital for an abortion. I never expected that my parents would be rear-ended by a dump truck. And passed away from then on. Felix Jean came home on the third day. At that time I had just come back from the hospital after picking up my medicine. A bag of painkillers. The doctor who prescribed the medicine with a serious expression asked me, Ms. Liang, where are your family? Painkillers will only worsen your condition. I curled my lips, a thin smile squeezing out from the hollowed cheeks. I know, but my family is gone. I don't want to live anymore. The doctor's words froze and he looked at me with a look of pity. I was wearing a large coat bought by my mom, but it still couldn't cover the bone-chilling cold inside me. I must be sick, my physical condition is too poor. I tightened my coat, opened the villa's door, but saw Felix Jean sitting on the sofa. When he saw me he lifted his foot and walked over. I, however, felt as if I had been stung in the eyes by his noble demeanor, subconsciously taking a step back. His originally hopeful eyes were now covered in thick gloom. Where did you go? He lowered his gaze at me, his tone cold and harsh. I blinked, ignoring the badge on his wrist, and said nothing. That badge, I had only seen it on Stella Ning's WeChat moments half a month ago. It was a birthday gift from her, hand-designed. And all the gifts I gave him over these years were disposed of by him for various reasons. The handmade cups were given to subordinates as ashtrays. The coat I waited 6 months for the delivery of was later used as a cushion for Stella Ning's dog at home. Even the first prenatal test report for the child I carefully prepared to conceive was casually torn to pieces by him. These 10 years, it has always been me tirelessly chasing after Felix Jean, caring about him, being concerned for him, loving him. Now I'm tired. Why are you going to the hospital? Why is your complexion so bad? Have you been feverish? He frowned and moved closer, raising his hand to check my forehead, but I dodged him. Don't worry, Mr. Jean, I'm fine. I lowered my gaze and suddenly understood Felix Jean's previous feelings. When you no longer love someone, even thinking of topics to Jung Fu him can be so exhausting. It's still early, we can still go to the Civil Affairs Bureau now. I went back to the master bedroom to put the medicine in place, then took the household registration book downstairs. But I met Felix's astonished expression. I asked him, it wasn't supposed to be a divorce? I agreed, let's go. Felix Jin's face turned ashen instantly. As if struck at his sore spot, he pointed at my nose and roared, What do you mean, Ione Liang? How can all the Liang family members be so selfish? Your parents were once impressed by my talent, but just because your family funded me for a few years, they forced me to marry you. Still relying on power to force Stella to study abroad at such a young age. Now that I've achieved success and fame, you all are still insatiable, wanting to use your divorce to take away the money I've earned, so you and your adulterer can run off together. He roared like a lion at the peak of fury. Visage contorted. I couldn't help but laugh, and I actually let out a laugh. The tremor in my abdomen set off aches and pains all over my body, laughing so hard my tears wouldn't stop. So my parents, these longtime charity workers. Felix Jean, an excellent student who was funded by my deceased parents, was it wrong? I had a secret crush on Felix Jean for 10 years. Asking my parents to secretly allocate the project to the entrepreneurial Felix Jean was wrong? My mother believed that Stella Ning's artistic talent was more suitable for prestigious universities abroad, so she funded her to study overseas. Was that also wrong? Ah, yes, I was wrong. I laughed until my chest ached and my mouth was full of blood. I made terrible mistakes in my life. Felix seemed startled by my madness, glaring at me coldly as he ground his molars and spoke. Speak up, was it your snobbish parents who came up with this idea again? Make them come and talk to me personally. I closed my eyes and let tears slide from my sockets. Thinking of my parents' bloodied bodies when they were in a car accident, only regret remained in my chest. At this moment the door was knocked on. It was the uncle and aunt from the next door. They are good friends of our parents but have long settled abroad. Upon learning of their passing they specifically returned this time. The neighbor aunt was crying with red, swollen eyes, trembling as she hugged me. I'm sorry, Ione, we came too late. The neighbor uncle was also wiping away tears, his voice choked with emotion. Lao Liang and his wife have never done anything wrong in their lives, how could they just leave like this? The grief and regret in their voices were genuine. A few seconds later Felix Jin's voice, filled with disbelief, rang out. Who do you say has passed away? 5. I looked at Felix Jean with red eyes and a cold smile. You hate my parents so much, shouldn't you be very happy that they passed away? Felix Jean opened his mouth but couldn't find the words for a moment. The neighbor aunt didn't recognize Felix Jean. She seemed to think of something and asked me, were you not with that boy your family was funding back then? Sigh, back then your factory was doing poorly, facing tight financial constraints, and your dad even specifically asked me to borrow 30,000 yuan for that kid's tuition fees. He said the kid was very talented and would definitely achieve success in the future. Bang! It was the sound of Felix Jean colliding with furniture. His face was pale as if he couldn't believe it. I, however, gave a slight smile and said to the aunt, let's not talk about this, aunt. I'll take you to see my parents. In the cemetery, the neighbor aunt and uncle were crying together. My tears have already dried, now only leaving a bitter, aching pain. What's puzzling is that Felix Jean also followed over, looking a bit flustered at me. The newly prominent Mr. Jean of Jiangqing, who has long become superior to others, also had such a flustered day. He lowered his gaze and looked at me, his voice hoarse. Why didn't you tell me about your parents passing? This was the first time since Felix Jean and I got married that he had addressed my parents in this way. Even at our wedding banquet, Felix Jean had only stubbornly called them uncle and aunt. Now that my parents are dead, he has changed his tune. It's truly ironic. I avoided his gaze and whispered softly, remember what you said when my dad's factory went bankrupt? He froze, then recalled something, trembling all over as panic flashed in his eyes. At that time, Felix Jean had become the president of a listed company. He had also successfully brought back the little childhood friend he had longed for, Stella Ning, to work as his secretary. But my parents' factory was gradually abandoned because it couldn't keep up with the internet. It ended up going bankrupt out of Wunar. Actually, before it went bankrupt, I went to ask for help from Felix Jean. I was pregnant with my first child at the time. Pregnant with my belly, I went to the group to find him, but because of his orders, I was stopped by the front desk at the first floor. Everyone in the group knew that Felix Jean did not welcome his wife. So I was forced to stand at the group's entrance. It was a rare heavy snowfall in Jiangqing that day. I stood there for 3 hours before finally waiting for Felix Jean to come downstairs, and Stella Ning whispering to him beside him. I actually didn't have the heart to compete for affection with Stella Ning back then. I only wanted Felix Jean to save my parents, so I walked stiffly and rushed over to ask for Felix Jean's help. Felix, can you help my parents? They are. But before I could speak, Felix Jean thought I had come looking for trouble for Stella Ning, and threw me away, shielding Stella Ning in his arms. He scoffed, dreaming even if your parents died I wouldn't spare them a glance. My heart ached as if cut by a knife and my stomach also throbbed intensely. Felix Jean hated me so much that he jerked his hand away with great force and I fell hard onto the snow. Had an abortion. From that day on I decided never to love Felix Jean again. 6. Felix Jean's face was pale as he was about to say something when a familiar ring interrupted him. It was the one he had set specifically for Stella Ning. Felix Jean abruptly stopped talking and answered the call. At the other end, Stella Ning's voice was frantic with tears. Felix, what should we do? Guogua is hurt. Guogua was the stray dog they picked up together with Felix Jean. Every time Felix Jean and I are alone for more than a day, Stella Ning uses Guogua as an excuse to ask Felix Jean to come back. Go ahead, see you at the Civil Affairs Bureau Minku tomorrow morning. I watched a hint of panic flash in Felix's eyes, and couldn't help but sneer inwardly. Back then when my child miscarried he didn't even care. After speaking I didn't bother looking at him anymore and turned to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. He said to the person on the phone, the pet hospital is right downstairs, you can take Guogua yourself. After he hung up he looked at me, his tone suspicious. Why do you have to divorce now? Did Sinshin come back from abroad? I frowned at him, not understanding why he had to mention Sinshin, my high school classmate who had long since gone abroad. General Jean, I shook off his hand wanting to explain but felt a warm wave surge from my nose. The next second Felix Jean was completely panicked. Yone. My last consciousness lingered on the terrified scream of Felix Jean. 7. I woke up again in the VIP ward of the hospital. A group of doctors surrounded the bedside and in the middle of them Felix Jean, whose face was so panicked he almost dared not look at me. It was so strange, he clearly hated me so much, how could he react this way? I don't feel like thinking about it. Aches all over, even in the bone gaps. Actually, the day I was diagnosed I was very scared too. I went to the hospital as the doctor recommended. But at night, in the pitch-black hospital corridors, the quiet rooms and the occasional pained groans that echoed around, I couldn't take it anymore. I can't be cured. I have late-stage bone cancer, there's nothing that can be done. I looked at Felix Jean, calmly trying to comfort him. You earned so much money, leave it for Stella Ning, I don't want it. Felix Jean, however, cried. It was the first time I had ever seen him cry. A 6-foot-tall man with his spine always straight and chin always up when talking to me. Now it has come down. He hunched his back, half kneeling in front of my hospital bed, holding my hands, his voice trembling. Ione, listen to the doctor. Will the treatment work? I'm a little angry and push him. Felix Jean, don't you understand what I'm saying? I said I won't treat it anymore. After I got married to Felix Jean, we had many arguments, and without exception Stella Ning was always the one to start them. And Felix Jean, without exception, would always retort back. This time his lips trembled, his eyes filled with fear and unease. He shook his head and said, Wifey, please. Please live. I froze, tilting my head in confusion and asking him, Felix Jean, you don't hate me anymore? Felix Jean looked as if he had been slapped out of thin air again, covering his face with a half-smile, trembling uncontrollably all over. He replied to me with tears in his eyes, not resenting that I have never resented you. But I still slipped out of the hospital under the cover of night, pulled out the needle. I definitely don't believe Felix Jin's words. I went back home and packed a simple bag. My time is running out. I want to hurry up and see the world. But on my way to the airport I was found by Felix Jean. He was driving his Kian, blocking my car in a particularly disheveled manner. The driver shouted in fear, Miss, do you owe him money? I forced a smile and said lightly, Yeah, I guess so. He had dark circles under his eyes and his eyes were full of red blood vessels. The moment he saw me he seemed to sigh in relief. Whiff. He strode over and gently pulled me into his arms, as if I were some fragile and precious item. I pushed him away, my eyes filled with confusion and disgust. Felix Jean, can you please stop bothering me? You clearly love Stella Ning, so just don't comf on me, okay? I didn't use umbilical cord blood to save her brother. Felix was dumbfounded and after a moment he said with a pale face, How do you know about this? I最终还是回了医院. The blow of losing both parents, coupled with the effects of the miscarriage. Felix Jean was dumbfounded. He asked with red eyes, Miscarriage? The doctor was stunned. Yes, the check shows that Ms. Lee had a miscarriage of a 3-month-old embryo. Felix Jean looked at me sharply and he remembered. It was on the day of his birthday. It was also the anniversary of his parents' death. I had already decided to divorce him back then, so none of the birthday gifts and blessings I would have prepared for him were given. I also had dinner with a lawyer friend who has known me for many years, asking him to help draft the contract. However, Felix Jean came home drunk as midnight. And forcibly had sex with me. I am also willing. Because he had not shown gentleness in front of me for too long. For a moment I was lost, unable to resist indulging in that illusion of gentleness. 3 weeks after that day I found out I was pregnant. But I also noticed that I've started to get nosebleeds occasionally. I stared at him, blinking slowly. Suddenly he seemed to realize something. He rushed over, carefully avoiding my foreline and held me gently, muttering over and over, Never mind. I don't care anymore. Honey, just focus on getting better. We'll have more children in the future. I turned away from him and lay down to sleep. Belated affection is cheaper than grass. I didn't want it anymore. 11. Chemotherapy was tedious and monotonous. Thankfully the time I spent awake grew shorter and shorter. Felix had booked me a VIP private room, and every day there were fresh flowers by my bed, my favorite yellow roses. It seemed like Felix had quit his job. He stayed by my hospital bed day and night. In my dazed state I seemed to hear his subordinate briefing him on something. Over the years Madame really had no intimate contact with Mr. Sin. Moreover, Mr. Sin seems to prefer men. I endured the pain and rolled over, my consciousness slipping into darkness. Of course Sin liked men. Back in 10th grade he planned to give Felix Jean a love letter until I beat him up. Days passed in a blur. The time I could stay awake was measured in hours. I grew thinner by the day, clumps of hair falling out every time I brushed it. Even the nurse who gave me injections couldn't hold back her tears when she saw me. But I didn't care. Soon I'd be reunited with my parents and our baby. And I was happy. 12. But Stella Ning seemed anything but happy. I'd just woken up and taken a few sips of warm water the nurse brought when the ward door suddenly slammed open. Stella stumbled in, drunk and disheveled. Gone was her usual glamorous self. Now she looked ragged and miserable, a scar slicing across her cheek. She stared at me with a ferocious expression, her voice dripping with unprecedented venom and hatred. Ione Liang. Why won't you die? This is what you get for stealing my man. Felix Gidge and I were childhood sweethearts. Why did you have to insert yourself between us? So what if your family had power? You were still unhappy those years you were married to Felix Gidge. I looked at her quietly, then asked softly, What about you? You got Felix Jin's love, so why are you in this state now? Stella flew into a rage, lunging at me to hit me. I had no strength to resist. But before she could touch me, Felix rushed in and slapped her hard to the ground. Who gave you permission to harass my wife? Felix glared at Stella with a coldness I'd never seen before, his tone icy and menacing. When Stella saw Felix, she trembled violently, begging for mercy. Felix, Gidge. I'm sorry. She cried, trying to crawl to his feet and hug his legs, looking pitiful and desperate, but Felix kicked her away. He said coldly, I already cured your brother. I owe you nothing. On the contrary, you slandered my wife, accused her of cheating with another man. I haven't even settled that score with you yet. Stella's face turned ashen. She trembled all over, glancing at me instinctively as if begging for my help. I was annoyed. Pulling the covers over my head, I said faintly, too noisy. In the next second, Felix dragged Stella out of the ward. As for Stella's fate afterward, well, I didn't care anymore. All I knew was that no one Felix Jean hated ever came to a good end. My parents and I were living proof of that. 13. Felix visited me more and more often. Eventually he might as well have moved into the ward. I could no longer get out of bed, and most days I remained unconscious. I was trapped in deep, vivid dreams. In them I was back in my girlhood, the first time I'd met Felix. A slender boy in an ill-fitting old coat, standing on the orphanage windowsill, cleaning diligently. Sunlight filtered through his brows and eyes, making his handsome features look ethereal and otherworldly. That's when I'd fallen in love with him. That's when I'd begged my parents, who'd come to sponsor a child, to choose him. I'd even helped transfer him to my class, vowing to protect him from then on. In the dream I kept screaming at myself, don't talk to Felix Jean. I grew anxious, breaking out in a cold sweat, but the girl in the dream paid no heed. She still followed Felix happily, like a little shadow trailing behind him. In truth, Felix hadn't always hated me. At first he'd smiled at me too. But later, never mind. It was all in the past. Only now it seemed Felix regretted it. He stayed by my hospital bed every day, crying. I didn't quite understand. But I found him annoying. He talked constantly, endlessly rambling about something. But what was he saying? My consciousness slowly drifted away from my body. I couldn't hear clearly. Goodbye, world. 14. In his nearly 28 years of life, Felix Jean had never felt such overwhelming regret. If only he'd been more rational, more sensible, would everything have turned out differently? Why had he believed Stella Ning's lies? Why hadn't he verified the truth before blaming everything on the innocent Ione Liang? Felix stared at Ione's tiny, emaciated body in the hospital bed. Nothing but endless remorse filled his heart. If only he hadn't been so cold and selfish. He and Ione could have had 2 lovely children, a happy marriage. It was all his fault. He shouldn't have let his pride convince him that Ione's parents had only sponsored him for his talent. He liked Ione too. That little girl with a ponytail who'd appeared at the orphanage, pale skin, long curly eyelashes. He'd liked her from the very beginning. Later, when he learned her parents would be sponsoring him, he'd been overjoyed. Especially when he found out he'd be transferring to her school. He'd tossed and turned all night, finding his cleanest set of clothes and washing them over and over, just to wear them on his first day. But when he arrived at the classroom, he'd seen a handsome boy sitting next to her, a boy who seemed very close to her. That boy was since Senator Felix wasn't an outgoing person. He'd been too afraid to ask the girl about it, so he'd kept his feelings bottled up. Later, Stella Ning had told him that the girl had always liked Sin Sin. Felix had felt as if his world had collapsed. But the girl had been so kind to him, always sticking by his side. So he'd felt happy on one hand, but on the other he'd constantly reminded himself, don't fall for her. Her family background is worlds apart from yours. Felix had never imagined that the girl would confess her love to him in college. But then Stella had said it was only because Sin Sin had gone abroad. Felix had grown bitter again. He didn't want to be anyone's backup plan. Yet he'd still loved her desperately. Until after graduation, an accident had led to them sleeping together. When he'd learned she was pregnant, Felix had proposed marriage, determined to take responsibility. Just as he'd thought everything was finally falling into place, Stella had appeared. She'd urged him to get a paternity test, claiming Ione had originally gone to see Sin Sin the night they'd slept together. So Felix had lied to Ione, telling her they were going for a routine prenatal checkup, while secretly arranging for a trusted doctor to perform the paternity test. The result had shattered him. He wasn't the baby's father. In that moment, Felix's heart had turned to stone. He drowned himself in work to numb the pain. That's when Stella had cried, telling him she'd been forced to go abroad by the Liang family. Old grievances and new anger had blended together, and Felix had vowed to take revenge. First, he deliberately cut off the Liang family's supply chains. Then he'd watched coldly as their factory went bankrupt, refusing to help. Only when they were completely ruined had he stepped in, buying their factory outright. After all, they were Ione's family. Felix had never wanted to kill them. He'd never expected they'd die in a car accident. He'd never expected Ione to develop a terminal illness. It was as if overnight his arrogance had cost him the entire world. Even now, after uncovering the truth, there was no going back. His little girl was gone forever. And in his world, spring would never come again. Epilogue. The weight of forever. The hospital room still smells like antiseptic and yellow roses. I've kept them fresh, just like I promised, even though you're not here to smell them anymore. The vase sits where it always did, on the nightstand next to the empty bed. Your favorite mug, the chipped one you refused to throw away, said it had character, is still there too, half full of cold tea. I can't bring myself to move it. Some days I swear I can still see you curled up against the pillows, your face pale but your eyes bright when you'd catch me staring. Stop looking like you're at a funeral, you tease, even when we both knew that's exactly what it felt like. I deserve this empty room, this silence, this ache that never fades. It's been 6 months since you left. 6 months of waking up at 3 a.m., reaching for your side only to find cold sheets. 6 months of visiting your parents' graves every Sunday, bringing the osmanthus cakes they loved, and whispering apologies they'll never hear. 6 months of staring at the paternity test results that still lie in the top drawer of my desk, forged, I now know. Stella admitted it before she disappeared. Said she paid the doctor off, said she couldn't stand the thought of us being happy. I should hate her. I should hunt her down and make her pay. But I don't have the energy. All the hatred in my body burned out the day they wheeled you into the ACU for the last time. Do you remember the first time we met? At the orphanage. I was 15, scrubbing windows because Sister Margaret said I needed to earn my keep. You were 14, standing in the doorway with your parents, your hair in a messy ponytail, your shoes scuffed at the toes. You stared at me like I was something interesting, not a charity case, not a ghost of a boy with no past. Your dad asked if I wanted to come with you to live in a real house, to go to a good school. I said no at first. Pride, I guess. Stupid, useless pride. But then you walked up to me, held out your hand and said, "My name's Ione. We have a swing set in our backyard. You can use it whenever you want." Your hand was warm. I still feel it sometimes late at night when the silence gets too loud. I moved in with you a week later. Your parents were kind, too kind. They never treated me like an outsider, never made me feel like I owed them anything. But I did. I owed them everything. And I repaid them by destroying their daughter, by letting my own insecurity turn me into a monster. You tried to love me, didn't you? Even when I pushed you away. Even when I ignored your calls, when I stayed late at the office to avoid coming home, when I let Stella's lies poison every good thing we had. Remember that winter you made me a scarf? It was ugly, bright red, lopsided, with a hole in one end. You'd stayed up 3 nights knitting it, your fingers pricked by the needles. I told you it was too childish, and left it in the back of my closet. A month later I found it on the couch, folded neatly. You'd mended the hole. You never said anything about it. You just smiled and said, "It's cold outside. Wear it." I did. Every day that winter. Even when my colleagues teased me about it. Even when I pretended to hate it. It was the only thing that made me feel like I belonged somewhere. And the coat, oh God, the coat. You saved up for 6 months to buy it for my 20th birthday. You said it was perfect for someone who's always cold. I wore it once, then gave it to Stella's dog when she complained her puppy was shivering. I thought it would hurt you. I thought if I pushed you far enough you'd leave and I wouldn't have to face the fact that I loved you more than anything, but I was too scared to admit it. You never cried. You never yelled. You just looked at me and said, "Okay." But your eyes, they were broken. I saw it then, but I didn't care. I was too busy wallowing in my own self-pity, too busy believing Stella when she said you were only with me for my money, for my status. You were pregnant once. Our baby. You never told me. I found out from the doctor after you'd lost it. He said you were 3 months along. Said you'd been bleeding for weeks but refused to come to the hospital because you didn't want to bother me. I killed that baby, Ione. Not with my hands but with my indifference. With the way I ignored you, with the way I accused you of cheating, with the way I made you feel like you were nothing to me. That night I came home drunk, my birthday, my parents' death anniversary, I forced myself on you. You didn't fight back. You just held me like you were trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. Thought it was pity. Now I realize it was love. The kind of love I didn't deserve, the kind I'll never find again. Stella told me the baby wasn't mine. Said you'd been with since that day. I wanted to believe her. Because if the baby wasn't mine, then I didn't have to feel guilty for treating you like trash. I didn't have to admit that I was scared that you'd leave me for someone who could love you better. Someone who wasn't broken like me. So I lied to you. Told you we needed to check on the baby, When really I was getting a paternity test. When the results came back negative, I felt relieved. Sick, twisted relief. I used it as an excuse to shut you out completely. To focus on work, to let Stella worm her way into my life, to pretend that you didn't exist. I found out the truth too late. Since Sin came to see me after you died. He told me he'd never been with you, not once. Said he'd tried to tell me years ago, but I'd refused to listen. Said he was gay, for God's sake. Said you'd beaten him up in 10th grade for trying to give me a love letter. I laughed when he said that. A bitter, hollow laugh. Because it's so you, fierce, loyal, willing to fight for me even when I didn't fight for you. Your parents' accident. I still blame myself for that. I cut off their supply chains, watched their factory crumble, then bought it out when they had nothing left. I thought I was being merciful. Thought I was saving them. But really I was punishing them. Punishing them for being kind to me, for loving me, for giving me everything I never had. I wanted them to hurt like I hurt. He said they died. And you lost the only people who'd ever loved you unconditionally. You never blamed me for it. Not once. You just said, it's okay, Felix. Accidents happen. How could you be so forgiving? How could you look at me after everything I'd done and still see something worth loving? The last month of your life I never left your side. I quit my job, moved into the hospital room, talked to you even when you couldn't hear me. I told you about the orphanage, about how scared I was when I first met you, about how much I loved you. I told you about the swing set, about the scarf, about the coat. I told you I was sorry. Over and over and over. You never responded. But one day when I was holding your hand you squeezed back. Just a little. Barely there. But I felt it. I cried like a baby. I thought it was a sign. Thought you'd forgive me. Thought we'd have more time. We didn't. You died in my arms. Quietly. Your head on my chest, your hand in mine. The last thing you said was my name. Just Felix. No anger, no bitterness. Just sadness. Like you were sorry for me. I buried you next to your parents. The tombstone has your name, your birth date, your death date. And underneath it says, beloved daughter, beloved wife. I added that. Even though we were never really husband and wife, not in the way that matters. Not in the way that's built on trust and love and respect. But you were mine. In every way that counts. You were mine. I still go to your grave every day. Bring you yellow roses. Talk to you. Tell you about my day, about how empty the house is, about how much I miss you. I know you can't hear me. But it makes me feel closer to you. Like you're still here, still listening, still loving me despite everything. Last week I found your old QQ diary. You kept it hidden in the back of your closet in a shoebox. You wrote about me. About how you'd loved me since we were kids. About how scared you were that I'd never love you back. About how happy you were when we got married. You wrote about our baby, about how you dreamed of naming him Xiaoyu after your grandma. About how you'd wanted to raise him in a house with a swing set. About how you'd wanted to give him the childhood we never had. I read it until my eyes burned. Until I couldn't breathe. Until I collapsed on the floor, clutching the diary to my chest, begging for you to come back. It's my fault. All of it. I was too proud, too scared, too blind to see what was right in front of me. I pushed away the only person who ever loved me, destroyed the only family I ever had, and now I'm alone. Forever. Stella's gone. Disappeared without a trace. I don't care where she is. I don't care if she's alive or dead. She took everything from me, but she also gave me the worst punishment imaginable. Living with the memory of you, living with the knowledge that I could have saved you, living with the fact that I'll never see you again. I still sleep in our bed. Your side is made up, but I still reach for it. I still smell your perfume on the pillows. I still talk to you when I'm alone. I know it's pathetic. I know I should move on. But I can't. How do you move on from the love of your life? How do you forget the person who made you feel like you belonged? The factory is still mine. But I don't care about it anymore. I've donated most of my money to charity, orphanages, hospitals, cancer research. In your name. I want to do something good. Want to atone for all the bad I've done. Want to make you proud. I visit the orphanage sometimes. The swing set is still there. A little rusted but still standing. I sit on it sometimes, push myself back and forth and think about you. Think about the day you held out your hand and said, my name's Ione. Think about how different things could have been if I'd just let myself love you. I'll never get over you, Ione. I'll never stop loving you. I'll never stop regretting everything I did. I'll spend the rest of my life missing you, mourning you, punishing myself for losing you. Maybe in the next life things will be different. Maybe I'll be brave enough to love you. Maybe I'll be worthy of you. Maybe we'll get the happy ending we deserved. Until then I'll wait. I'll wait for the day we meet again. I'll wait for the day I can hold you, kiss you, tell you how sorry I am. I'll wait for the day I can finally make it right. The yellow roses are starting to wilt. I'll go buy more tomorrow. I'll keep buying them. Every day. For the rest of my life. Because you loved them. Because they remind me of you. Because it's the only thing I can do for you now. I miss you. More than words can say. More than my broken heart can bear. Goodbye, my love. Until we meet again. Forever yours.